Pebbles kind of guy, too?
Yeah, I do fruity.
More of a Cocoa Pebbles kind of guy.
Dude, Cocoa Pebbles or where it's at?
I don't know,
You know
man.
where
I'm
else
just
is
not
where
a big
it's at?
chocolate fan.
Did
You know
you
what else is where it's at?
did you take your chalky milk home when you left Ben's?
No, I left it. I forgot it.
I do
Forgot
think
it.
it was chalky.
I took the ice cream though.
Yeah, you took the
Why
sugar.
why would you leave that at Ben's? That's just
I'm not the big chocolate guy. What can I say?
rude. Hey, welcome to Travelers Tips and Tales. I'm Michael,
I'm Ben.
And I'm Jacob.
and today we are going to be talking to you guys about creating a backstory. Now, creating a backstory is one of those things that is just implemented in the whole point of the game because you're seeing your backstory used to create character arcs for you if your DM is willing to take that extra step with you. And it adds a huge dynamic to the game that wouldn't be there otherwise. Now, one of the big things that you need to learn before you create your backstory is a little bit of the world lore. So that way you're creating a character that makes sense in the world and that works with everything that is already set up. Now, Ben is one of those people that goes very deep into his world lore, and he can definitely share a lot about that. So why don't we go ahead and have Ben explain that?
Yeah, so here's the thing. To all new or experienced players out there who just never really thought about it from a DM perspective, or if they never really had the chance to make a backstory with their DM before, your DM is working with you and your fellow players to create a cool story in this world that they have created or that they have found for you. And when somebody comes up to you as a DM and says, hey, I have this really great idea for a backstory. This is the concept. How do you think we could implement this? That is a DM's favorite thing in the world because they are talking to them and they're asking them questions. A DM's least favorite thing in the world is when someone shows up first session, they have not talked to the DM at all. They have not discussed it at all, and they say, here's my character, I'm playing this race with this background in this class. And half the time when that happens to me, in my case, I think, okay, this is just going to be a very boring character. The other half of the time, I think, I don't even want that race in my world. That doesn't even exist. This thing you've created doesn't even exist in this world. How in the world do you expect me to come up with something for this?
We were talking about it the other day because of my most recent love of Warforged that I found. Because I started playing one in another game, and I was talking to you. I was like, "Yeah, I might try and play a Warforged in your world." And you're like, "Good luck, because they don't exist."
Yeah, my world existed pre-Ravnica and pre-Eberron, so anything from those books, good luck. A few things I might take for every now and then, like I think it's like the third book where goblins are mentioned as a playable race, but other than that,
I mean, goblins are kind of a staple though, so.
Yeah, you could pretty much play a goblin in any world. It just might not make a whole lot of sense why this monster is in town, but it never does.
Yeah, it's one of those things that it's a fun concept to do, and if you implement it right, it works very well. But you and the DM both have to work so hard to implement it the right way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so for
everyone
example,
has to be on the same page.
For example, I had a player who he made a character and his whole backstory that he wrote out a whole like 2-page backstory and sent it to me, and he said, hey, what do you think? This is the background I want to use. And he wanted to use the Simic researcher background from the Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica book. Guildmaster's Guide is a great book if you want to run a campaign in Ravnica, but for where they were going to be adventuring, that backstory made no sense at all. They were going to be in the middle of a desert, thousands of miles from the ocean. That backstory involves everything to do with the ocean. He ended up keeping it against my advisory that he would not fit in He ended up starting a game thousands of miles from the ocean with a bunch of seaweed, some shells, some preserved seafood, and everyone in the game, I made sure that he knew. Everyone in that world said, "What is that? I have no idea what that is." He's trying to trade, and they said, "Yeah, I have no idea what that is. That's not. I don't want that."
Yeah,
Where
it's
did
like
you get that?
garbage.
Yeah.
Well, and that kind of brings us into the next point that also follows the point of world lore, which is knowing the setting. You have to know the different places that you have available to you. There might be places that the DM has as off limits for you to create a character from, because there's no way that a character could come from there and still be alive in the world. Or maybe there's places that are flooded with all these different races, but the one race that you want to be does not belong there at all. They're seen as an outcast, and so you wouldn't be from there as that race.
Or maybe even he's just trying to use a certain location in his world that, definitely exists, but he more so wants to use it as a plot point later in the campaign. There's a lot of possibilities for what the DM might have up his sleeve. His or her sleeve.
And most of the time, if a player takes the time to learn about a DM's world, and they say, "Hey, I really want to create a character from this place. Can you tell me about it?" A DM will happily work with you. And even if it's something that normally doesn't make sense, I'm sure they would love to work with you and help you figure that out. For example, I want to play a Goliath that's from Neverwinter. Well, how did he end up in Neverwinter? That's something that is part of his backstory, but he can still be from Neverwinter, It's just something to work with your DM. Just don't be unreasonable about it, and your DM, I'm sure, will not be unreasonable about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, working with your DM has its advantages to it. I mean, you've already heard of how much it makes life simpler on both you and the DM. You get to learn which things will work seamlessly in the world or with as little problems as possible. But you can also, if your DM lets you, you have the chance to create a new place in the world that maybe your DM didn't have a spot for, but now that you mention it, they know exactly where to put it, and you can come from there and your whole backstory be set there. And you've just added a new place to this world that the DM has worked so hard to create, and now you're helping enrich it even more.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That is one of the most magical things you can do when someone comes up to you and says, "Hey, I have this completely original, unique idea you've never heard before," and the DM just goes, "Tell me more."
Yeah. Yeah, and one of the things that you consider, so getting into the actual building of the backstory here and into the meat and potatoes of it, you need to start figuring out what kind of backstory are you looking to have? Are you looking to have a story where your life was filled with tragedy? Or are you looking for a story that, breeds happiness and produces a little bit more of a positive outlook that your character has on life? I know that's something that we've all gone through, and Ben and Jacob, you guys could explain a little bit about typically what you guys like to look at when you're going through that stuff.
I like to look at both sides of the coin, really. Sometimes it just depends on what kind of outlook I want my character to have on the world, where they originated and where they're going, So sometimes if I think it'll be helpful for my character to come from a tragic backstory, then I'll set him up with a tragic backstory, right? Or if I think that I want my character to have a very optimistic and positive outlook on the world around him or her, I'll give them a more happier, easygoing backstory. But then typically with the happy ones, I still like to have certain events in the beginning or middle of the campaign where it just really brings them down to rock bottom and kind of humbles them and kind of teaches them the lesson that the world is not always what you expect.
Yeah, definitely.
I personally like to start with learning about the setting if I'm going to be playing in someone else's game. And I will come up with a concept for a character, and I'll ask them, "Hey, this concept, where do you think someone like that would be from? where do you think it's most likely? And then from there, I'll learn about the town, what it's like, or the city, maybe, or it could be a cave for all I know. I'll learn about what that area is like. I'll think about, what would it be like to be raised there? Who would have raised me there? Would it have been my parents, or would my parents not even be there? Would it be someone who found me, or a family member, or was I raised by wolves? Who knows?
Yeah.
And I like to take that into consideration when I'm for my outlook on life. How and where was I raised? In what environment was this character? What environment did this character have growing up?
Yeah.
What formed them into the person they are?
Yeah, and some of the biggest things that people will typically use for a character that comes from tragedy, they might have gone through slavery, as one of Jacob's characters has, or
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they lost a family member or a beloved friend in a gruesome battle where their city or their town or village was overrun, and they have no choice but to start looking for the person who did that and avenge them. And that might be something that they find is the greatest motivation for them in life, is trying to figure out what happened, how can I fix this, and how can I make sure that no one else goes through this again. One of the things that I've noticed is there aren't as many things to think about when you're thinking of a happy backstory. That's at least something for me that I struggled finding. I don't know if you guys have been able to find any really cool ideas about it or not. I'd be interested in hearing them.
I always like, if I'm going to have a happy backstory, the only thing you really need, technically speaking, in terms of Dungeons and Dragons, is why did this character become an adventurer? There has to be a reason why they left behind their happy life. And it could be as simple as they really want to go out and see the world. They want to go out and experience the world, or they want to go out in search of this dream they've always had of finding this legendary temple at the bottom of the ocean and claiming the sacred trident of Atlantis. Who knows?
Yeah.
It could be something as absurd as that, or something as simple as they just want to go out and get something different. They want to experience life. I think as long as they have that coming from, a perfectly happy place in life, there's nothing wrong with that. They could come from a happy family, they have a happy life in a nice, peaceful town, and they just want something more. They want something different.
Yeah, some other examples could be, did someone else force them out of their home or their town, maybe? Could they have been forced out by the rest of the party in one instance that I can think of for one of my characters? They were banished by their own city. But, or are they leaving for money? Are they just trying to make a couple extra bucks around doing what they know how to do, being a mercenary? Some other instances of what can be the trigger for your character to go out in the world and start adventuring.
Yeah, I recall one of your characters, Jacob. They left home to become an adventurer because they were chosen by divine powers.
Yeah.
They were just this little girl who liked to carry books around and didn't even have proper adventuring equipment. They all of a sudden they were chosen by by these otherworldly entities.
I opted to start that game without any gear.
Yeah. All you started that game with was a very crazy, very happy-go-lucky mother who did not know how to stop a carriage in any way, shape, or form.
and a bag of holding full of books.
Yeah. Full. Completely full.
Yeah, chock full. I could not use it for any other storage. It was my own personal library.
Yeah, and this is all stuff that starts to lead into the next big thing to figure out, which is, why do you want to become an adventurer? Depending on your backstory, that's going to change. Like we said with tragic and happy backstories, if you're from a tragic backstory, your reason for adventuring might be to either escape whatever place you're in, or to avenge somebody that you lost, or something along those lines. Whereas with a happy backstory, You might be going off to adventure just to see the world, just to explore. Or in Jake's case, he had a character that was called to adventure, so he did. And that's something that you really have to start thinking about your character's motives in life to see what would their reason be.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so one of the big things that you have to start considering is what led you to wanting to become an adventurer. And your backstory plays a huge part in that, whether it's the tragic backstory or the happy backstory. If it's from tragedy, maybe you want to escape the place that you've been in, or maybe you want to set out on an adventure to track down the person who killed your family. You never know what it could lead to, and that's one of the cool things about D&D is you meet these different groups of people, and maybe your views of the world align, maybe they don't. And that's one of the things that I love is once you meet those people, that helps shape you even more and could change your goals or could help further your goals. What do you guys think a big thing is when thinking about wanting to start adventuring?
Well, one thing I think about while starting when my character decides to start adventuring, a lot of my characters, I like the idea of adventuring just like happening to them more than them deciding for themselves. So another thing I like to think of it more as like I'm playing a tennis match maybe, and so someone serves the ball to me and then I return it. And so I like to try and do a reactionary kind of a system. And so like how does my character respond to the burdens that are given to him, and what does that lead him towards, along with the party, of course. So a lot of my characters kind of tend to be bigger on the party members, and so they try and build goals for the party themselves overall and what they think the party needs to do.
Yeah, I try to, when I'm thinking about a character, if it's not immediately apparent when I come up with the concept why they wanted to be an adventurer, I usually try to think what would be the best story. What would make the coolest story for this adventure? So, for example, one character who just started off as an adventurer, he didn't really have a reason why. The concept was just as an adventurer, was one of my characters named Jabble Fabble. And he was an adventurer because he had no other choice. He got lost in a cave for 15 years, and when he came back, his village was gone. And so he set off on an adventure to try to figure out what happened. A character of mine that had to really think about why they wanted to was another character of mine that I mentioned before on this show, Gerald. And Gerald, he had a lot of experience when he was younger. He had a lot of things going on in his life, and that led him to becoming a doctor. And as a doctor, he could have easily settled down. He could have easily gone into any major city and started a medical practice and been done with it. But instead, he chose to take his skills and go. And he wanted to spread his skills and use them for as much good as he could do. And that is what led him to becoming an adventurer. So that's kind of how I think of it. Is if it's not immediately apparent, you have to come up with a reason, because if they don't have a reason, they're not an adventurer, they're not a D&D character. They're more of an NPC than they are a player character.
Yeah, of course, once the rock starts rolling and my character is really thrown into the world for a couple sessions, it's always good to try and start making some small goals or bigger goals for your character. Some of them, they might have certain things that they want to buy, so they have to get enough money to get it, or certain people that are burdening them, and so they have to figure out how to work around their confrontation with that person, other NPCs or whatever. So yeah, once the character starts to develop a bit more, the goals will always come easier.
Yeah, and sometimes if you're struggling to find the reason for adventuring, you can start to think about what are your character's interests and how do they align with the events going on in the world? If there's a big war going on that is affecting where they're from, maybe one of their major goals for adventuring is to find a way to bring an end to the war. You know,
Yeah.
maybe they want to create a safe environment and develop a family of their own, something that they can keep on just loving for all of the rest of their life after they're done adventuring. And that's something that I have found is so fun to do, is to think about the events of the world and how they affect my character, and what can I do to have the world shape him in different ways. I know that you guys have both done that. I've seen you guys do that in your characters. And a little bit later, we're going to go into how we kind of created each of our own characters' backstories. And we're going to give examples for each of us with a specific character that we have. And I think right now, our best thing is Ben has some ultimate backstory questions to help you guys out, to help us out whenever we're creating characters in the future. And if you want to go ahead and go over those.
Yeah, so I have thought about it. I put a lot of thought into it. And there are 5 questions that I like to ask myself when I'm creating a character backstory that I think help me bring out exactly what I'm looking for and what will create a better story. So I know there are other videos out there with either more or less questions. How to Be a Great GM has a great video about that I personally like, but these are my 5 that are a little bit different. First question: where were you raised? And this kind of starts with the concept of your character. You talk to your DM about it, you get the information you need, you figure out, okay, what place sounds like really cool that I really want to focus on. Do I want to be from a tiny little hamlet outside of a major city? Do I want to be from a far off land? Do I want to be from this small forest village of elves in the middle of a magical forest full of fae? It's up to you. Wherever your DM gives you, wherever you can find, that's where you were raised. And find out, how did that affect you? And really think about that. And really put that into how your character became who they were. And the second part of that, the second question is, who was it that raised you? Was it your parents? And if so, what were they like? Was it a family member? What were they like? What did they treat you like? How did they raise you? What values did they instill into you? Were you raised maybe by a community? Maybe you didn't have parents or a real family. Were you raised by the whole town and you were kind of like the village kid that everyone knew and everyone took care of? You know, what kind of values would those instill into you? The third question I like to ask is, what did I do before I was an adventurer? Was I a blacksmith? Did I train an apprentice under someone in the town I came from? Was I a hunter who went out every day with the other men from my village and hunted? Did I have some kind of skill that I was exceptionally good at? Or was I maybe not too skilled at anything? Maybe I worked as a shopkeeper. Maybe I stocked shelves. And I was just so bored with the everyday life that I just had to get out and had to go and get out of there. Which leads me to my fourth question: why did you leave? Regardless of what kind of situation you have when you're growing up, you know, where you were raised or who raised you or what you were doing, every character has to have a reason why they left. And it could be as simple as adventurers came into town one day and swept you off your feet and now you're off and you have no idea what you're doing or why you're here. Or it could be something as complicated and complex as, you know, my parents disappeared under mysterious circumstances long ago. It has something to do with this ancient artifact that has since gone missing, and I need to know what happened. I need to find that artifact. I need to investigate it. I need to know what happened to my parents. It could be anything you can imagine. As long as you have that reason to leave, you can go off and become an adventurer. And join the game of D&D. And the fifth, and I think maybe most important question, what did you leave behind and what are you looking for? And the reason that it is the most important question, in my opinion, is everything that you leave behind in your backstory, your DM can then take and use and throw back at you later on, so that you maybe don't expect it to come back. Maybe you left behind a brother or sister and they've been out looking for you. They have no idea where you've been. Or maybe you left behind, maybe you were engaged to be married, and maybe you left behind your fiance without saying a word, and they've been worried sick. Or maybe they're angry, maybe they're resentful and they're looking for revenge. That can be a great story opportunity and a great story hook that no one will see coming. And then what are you looking for? You know, if you leave town because you were swept off your feet one day and you find yourself in the middle of this grand adventure, you still have to be seeking something. Are you seeking bigger and grander adventures? That's still a valid thing to be looking for. Or are you seeking great wealth or great fame? Are you looking for a person? Are you looking for your parents, trying to find out what happened to them? Are you looking for someone or something or some place that you've heard about and you want to find? What are you looking for? What can the DM use to give you those plot hooks that you will be wanting to come back to again and again and again? And once you have those answered, once you have those 5 questions, you will have a backstory that your DM can work with, that they can use to guide you and help you have an amazing time being an adventurer and playing D&D. And something that your fellow players will appreciate, that you have this much thought put into your character, and that they can, you know, poke and prod your backstory and find all these cool things about it that they all will also get enjoyment out of.
Yeah, and those are all questions that are very important to developing your character, whether it's your first time creating a character or your 10th or 20th time. Those questions lie at the core of creating a good backstory, as Ben said. They help you, they help the DM, and whether it shows in an obvious or more subtle way in the way that we create our characters, they're always in the base root of it. And so while we get into the stories that we have and how we created them, if you want to go ahead and look out for those and how we answered them, so that way you can kind of get in a better idea of different ways that you can go about it. So let's go ahead and start off with Jake and how you created your character.
Yeah, so today I brought, for my character show and tell, I brought my first character. Because he kind of stands from like a very original trope that a lot of D&D players use, where they come from turmoil, of course, not a happy backstory. And so my character, specifically Cade, I talked about him a couple episodes ago in our desert story, but he came from a slave town. And so this part, I'm working with my DM, talking about the location where I was raised, where I was brought up. And so he talked about the slave town inside his world. And I thought that was real interesting. So I decided to originate from there. And so my character started out the first 20 years of their life as a slave. No name given to them, just a number. And, you know, and there was countless stories of his friends trying to leave and being punished for it. And so one day he had enough and he left. And he hit the woods, and all of his friends always tried to outrun the guards and the barracks around the fortress of the city. And my character decided to take the slow and steady approach. And that kind of goes into how they were a rogue. They escaped through stealth. Then they proceeded to live in the woods. So continuing on this origin of this character was a nobody, right? No one, he doesn't exist in this world. And he's also a halfling, which at the time in Ben's world were extremely rare. because part of the lore of his world was that the halflings were all enslaved. And so he, all of his family roots and everyone were taken from him. And he now lived in the woods for another 10, 15 years or so, I think. I think it was around 20 years. And so that's where my actual like background, the one I get abilities from and stuff, came in. I was a hermit. And so yeah, he came from nothing, and he was a nobody. And it really helped me shape out his personal outlook of the world. He was very optimistic once he left, because he came from such a dark place. He didn't want to admit how dark the world could be, and so he was very optimistic at the beginning. He was the most friendly, outgoing kind of character in the party. He was always saying hi to people. It was a joke that I had where anytime anyone was introduced in the game, I'd just go, "Hi, I'm Cade," and I'd put out my hand. And so I start there, coming from nothing, and then I like to work in this case, I worked in the weakness. He was a hollow man at the time. He was very much just a shell. He would go out to people, and he's very optimistic and such, but if you really got down, it didn't take much to break him. And that's where I started to work in another big part of my characters, where he had this severe alcoholism. And so that's something I used in as a weakness. He would drink to a point where sometimes he would have disadvantage on a lot of checks because he'd be considered drunk and that kind of thing. And it just kind of gave him a crutch, where he really used it as a crutch throughout a very large majority of the campaign. And he didn't learn till very later on that it wasn't a part of him that defined him. It was a weakness of his. And there can always be setbacks, of course, as well. My character, later on throughout the game, he learned that one of the most important things to him was not money and business, but it was more so the people around him. And he grew this love for another character that he ended up adopting, which was this other character that Ben just talked about a little bit ago, Jabble Fabble. And he really humbled him, and he went clean for a while, right? And he was good. He would occasionally go on adventures and make the money. He also had a really successful business, and his life was set. And then Jabble, Ben, the DM, throwing a curveball at me, he kind of, in a way, took away Jabble Fabble from Cade while still having him be there. It wasn't a thing that put Jabble in danger or anything, but Jabble was just upset with Cade, and Cade didn't really know what to do. He was in a new box. He was in a new problem that he never experienced before, where someone that he really loved was upset with him, right? And so he escaped his problems, but now he's back into them. And that continued him to be an adventurer and be a kind of a bad person for a little bit more, for a bit longer. And adding to your backstory is always okay at a later time. I think at the session 1, Cade's backstory was just that he was a slave and then a hermit. Like, that was basically it. He broke out, and then he lived in the woods. That was it. I never really dwelled upon it much past that, because it was my first character, so didn't have much other thoughts on it. But yeah. And so yeah.
Yeah, I think that's usually how it goes with the first character, is you're not really sure what all to do. I know I was very nervous about, I don't want to include something that might throw off the game, because I came into the game not knowing Ben beforehand, and we kind of sat down and just made characters, and I know I shouldn't have, but I felt almost as if I was rushing myself, just because I knew the quicker I made a character, the quicker we can get started playing.
Yeah, rolling the dice and such.
Yeah. So if you are a first time player, or it's just something that you feel more comfortable with, where you create a simple backstory and you add to it throughout the game, as long as your DM's cool with it, it's a really cool thing to be able to do. And I know Cade grew a lot that way.
He grew a lot throughout the game.
It also
Really
helped that Cade was the only member of the party that survived from session 1 all the way till the end.
Yeah. Yeah, he, like I said before, he was a hollow man, and so he was easy to break down. And throughout the campaign, he was broken down again and again and again. And, you know, him dying a couple times also helped that case. But he, you know, it takes for him to break down, for him to realize who he was. At the beginning, he wasn't himself, right? He was just what he thought other people would want him to be. He didn't know the social mannerisms of you know, being someone in a city or anything like that, because he never had that experience before, even though he was like 42 years old. You know, like a fully grown man.
Yeah.
You know, still 3 something because he's a halfling, but you know. And so yeah, it took loss after loss after loss that just kept digging him deeper and deeper into that hole. And I thought it was very interesting to see where my character would just have these ups and then downs and then ups and then downs of him getting hopeful and then someone being taken away from him and him just reverting back to his old ways. It's like a quicksand where he grabs a branch, but then it snaps and he starts slipping back in, you know? And that's, I think that was really fun for me to toy with for my first character. And I thought, props to past Jacob, I thought my pacing for his character developments were pretty good on just, you know, humble brag here, on when he would be, you know, stuff would be taken from him. And, you know, a lot of that was also Ben and just the dice of, you know, other characters not making it out or whatever. And it took a long time for my character to just find that happiness and just to say no. And it's actually ironically what killed the game. because at a point my character realized that he doesn't like being an adventurer. like this isn't the life that he enjoys, always being at risk. And he's done it for so long now that he feels like it's been stolen from him. The possibility of just having a normal, humble life has been taken from him. But on the bright side, at least at this point, he's powerful enough to stop anyone who's going to try and bring him back to his adventuring ways. And yeah, and so it kind of ended the campaign in that, you know, we're still in the world, and so the campaign's still going on. But that party specifically kind of ended because every session, every adventure, the party would just have to convince my character to come along with them. It was kind of funny, but you know. And so it took a long time for him to just find that what he liked his life. You know, he's finally settling down now, I can say happily. You know, he's gone out for his last hurrah, and I have retired him to be an NPC in Ben's world, and I honestly can't wait to bump into him as another one of my characters.
A terrifying NPC, to be sure.
He is so terrifying. He is so broken.
You've come really close to running into him as your other player characters, and it is nuts.
I've brushed past him as like 3 of my other characters, like in crowded hallways, kind of a situation. It's really funny. I love it. I think in one game I literally was voicing 2 characters. They weren't in the same room, but like we had like sending stones, and so I was talking to the same person as 2 of me. It was really weird. I thought it was hilarious.
Jacob, I think it is worth mentioning just how amazing it is that your first ever character you managed to get from level 1
to level 20
all the way to level 20.
Totally legit XP. So, you know, it wasn't milestone. I killed every cultist.
All 30,000 of them.
All the chimeras, all the succubi and demons and beasts, all of it.
Here's the thing, though, Jacob. I want to remind you, there is one cultist that we never killed.
There's one cultist that has continued to evade me.
It was purely by coincidence.
Purely by coincidence. I can't believe, man. He's really good at die rolls because he's always the guy who gets away.
Yeah.
Thought it was really funny. I think at one point in the game, Cade even found his journal and he was like, that one gets to live. I'm not going to hunt for this guy.
Yep, you found
this
his
guy's
journal.
cool.
He's
learned his lesson. he was like, man, this sucks. He's like, being in cults is bad. And I was like, good job, dude.
Yeah, I think it was more like, I think he more said, man, this used to be a sweet gig until those adventurers started taking out all the fun cults.
All the fun cults.
And now I'm here with all the crazy blood sacrifice cults, and I don't like this anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Cade is the perfect example within our group of someone who came up from tragedy and turned their life around and made it their own and took control of their life.
Yeah. There was a certain point in his story where every decision beforehand was made by someone else and every decision afterhand was made by him. Yeah. And I think that's nice. That's a nice thought.
Yeah. And on the flip side of that, we have a character that I made, that I currently run, that has gained the nickname within our group as the Wholesome Boy.
He's so nice. I love him.
He is a character that comes from a very happy background. He doesn't really have any major tragedies in his life. And I'm going to go ahead and talk to you guys a little bit about him now. His name is Landers Nemetsk. He is a human druid who, because of the first game that I was in of Ben's, I knew a little bit about the world. And so I was able to take this place in the world where we spent most of our time in our old campaign. And then in between that and another major city was the inn that Jacob's character Cade just created, and it became his livelihood. And in between this city and this inn, there's just this vast forest. And my character, after leaving his home to go and start to find his way in life, he lived in that forest. Now, his home was originally in that city, and he lived with his parents and his sister, and they weren't really well off or anything, but they made enough to get by. And he never really could recall any time in his life where he was unhappy or felt like his family was being mistreated by anybody. They were simply workers for the city. They lived just outside the city limits, and they lived a very humble lifestyle because they couldn't afford much more. Now, when I started developing this character, I needed to kind of start developing what were his core values. I knew family was going to be a core value of his that I wanted, because I wanted him to have a connection to his family that none of my characters had really had before, because all of my characters in the past, either their family died or their family betrayed them, or they were torn away from their family. And I wanted to change a pace. I wanted to see if I could pull off playing a happy character. So far, I think it's going pretty well.
I want to say you're doing pretty good, man.
I think you've made everyone in that game fall in love with your character.
Something about Landers, the second I met him, and I was like, this is a good guy. He's a chill dude.
Yeah, and this family sense that he has kind of led into his next core value that I determined, and that was the love of nature. He grew an appreciation for the things around him, not ever taking advantage of others, and having nature play a role in his life was something that I felt fit perfectly. And it ended up being his main reason for leaving home. He went into the woods and that's why he became a druid, was his love for nature. He started learning as much as he could about the environment he grew up in, and then once he got past that, he grew in his magical powers, and he was able to go to the College of Mages, and that is in another city where our campaign mostly takes place in the desert, the city called Jazima. And this college floats above the city, and it has this huge library with a vast wealth of knowledge and all these books that he can read and learn from to learn these different techniques that he could use as a druid. There's druids that are on the council. I think there's one, actually, if I remember correctly. Yeah, so there's one druid on the council of mages, and he's able to potentially learn from that person, grow his power, and really hone his skills. And I wanted him to kind of have that as also a way to just get out more, meet new people. And that's how he ended up actually meeting the party, was by being in that city at that college. It was convenient because it worked as a way to write him into the story, but it was also something that I felt made sense for him. He wanted to learn. He wanted to find a way to not only just protect nature, but also become one with it. And that's something that I feel that he's done very well over the small amount of time that I've been able to play him. He uses his powers to commune with nature, and going back to that family value, he was able to learn a spell called Dream, which for me kind of is a tie between nature and family, because dreams are something that we all kind of inherently have. We all have dreams, and maybe we remember them, maybe we don't, but he found a way to manipulate this spell in a way that allows him to just communicate with his mom in the middle of the night just a few times a week. You know, he gets to talk to his family on times where he may be gone for weeks or months at a time, but he still wants them to know that he has not forgotten about them, because they are some of the most important people in his life. Now, this also goes for the friends that he meets along the way. One of his ideals is that anyone who is willing to accept him is family to him. And that has brought his bond with everybody in the party so much further. And I mean, within 2 sessions of meeting them, they were willing to all give up money that they have gotten over their adventures to help him and his family, so that way his family can start to live a little bit better of a life than they already have. And this has just brought them even closer together. So I'm excited to see what becomes of him in the future. I know that he has goals to have a family of his own. Whether he lives to see those goals through or not, we have yet to see. Ben, please don't kill Landers.
I have to say, as the DM for this game, it is so stressful trying not to A, kill Landers, or B, corrupt or break Landers, because he's just so pure.
We just want to keep him as our little boy forever.
Yeah, we don't want to break him.
I also want to bring up was like the most wholesome and lovely like half hour, maybe 45 minutes of just Landers visiting home. It was so cute.
Yeah, Landers got to visit his parents and his sister, and using the money that the party mates gave him, he was able to give them that money to send them on a vacation, which he ended up taking them to Cade's Inn. And
so wholesome. I thought it was hilarious.
Unfortunately, Jacob's character, who was in this party, was not with us at the time.
Yeah.
So yet another missed opportunity.
Where my characters could have but didn't meet.
Yeah, and that just goes to show that, you know, even a happy character is a ton of fun to play, and you can do so much with them, just as much as with a tragic character. That being said,
I also want to point out before we move on,
Yeah.
though, that it's like you have this happy character, and this certain one that you have right here, Landers, right? It's not only that it's something that you can do, but it's not like this is the only type of happy character you can have. Like there's still so many possibilities of happier backgrounds and everything, just as many as there are tragic ones, because there can be such a variety of tragic backgrounds of where you come from, like my character or the character we're about to hear about, Ben's. But there's also an immense amount of happy backgrounds that you could have too. It doesn't always have to be kind of like Lander's story. It could be something else, you know? I think it's very interesting.
Yeah. So we've given you guys the tragic background example. We've given you guys the happy background example. Now, here comes a third type of background that I really don't know how to classify it. It's a little bit of both. It's some weird homogenous blend of the two.
A little bit of both.
Ben, why don't you tell us?
I refer to this kind of character backstory as what they refer to in psychology as a case study, which it refers to a specific person or maybe a few people where they have some extremely rare circumstances that creates this very interesting and unique way to study either how their brain works or how they develop this extremely rare personality. I refer to this that way because when making this character, did not pull from myself. I did not pull any aspects of myself. I pulled inspiration from a book. And when I made this character, I specifically said, I want to play a character who suffers from severe post-traumatic stress. And I looked up and did my research as best I could from as many sources as I could, as well as taking a couple courses on psychology before playing this character, which is why I wanted to play him in the first place. And I even worked with my DM for this game, Jacob, to make sure.
I do want to point out how well you worked with me too. It wasn't like you walked up to me and said, my character wants to have PTSD, and I'll be like, okay. But like we really set up our own system of we made a little bit of rusty here because we haven't played this game in a while, but we made certain saving throws for after certain triggers that we gave your character.
Yeah.
Right.
And we eventually even gave him a 7th ability score called Sanity.
Yeah.
Raised or lowered depending on where my character was at mentally.
Yeah.
And that would determine whether or not he had an episode or not.
Props to you. Great working with your DM there. Amazing. Loved it.
Thank you. I like to think that as much as I complain about people not doing it, that I am capable of doing it from time to time.
In this case, you definitely did. I can confirm. As the DM in question.
So this character, I took inspiration from a book called The Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka. And for anyone who's ever heard of Franz Kafka, or anyone who's ever not heard of Franz Kafka, he was an interesting case study on his own. He, as an author, a lot of his works were very kind of odd. He wrote from an interesting perspective that a lot of people find either discomforting or just kind of uncomfortable. And in particular, The Metamorphosis was a book of his that he never intended to publish. It was a book that was published after his death by people who found this book that he had written, and it is very much just written for himself, and that makes it a very good in-depth look at his own mental state. And The Metamorphosis focuses on a character called Gregor Samsa, which is actually the name of my character. My character's name is also Gregor Samsa. And he wakes up one day. He lived a perfectly normal life. He was a businessman, a salesman. He took care of he provided for his family, his father, his mother, and his sister. He was the money maker, the breadwinner of the house. One day he wakes up and he's turned into a giant bug. And his family doesn't know what to do. They freak out, they panic. He just wakes up one day and is a giant bug. And slowly, over the course of the book, he kind of breaks down mentally until the point where he is more this creature than what he ever was before. And that is what I took inspiration from for this character. Gregor Samsa, he is based in the Forgotten Realms. So anyone who knows about the Forgotten Realms, who's played D&D before, or who has listened to videos or researched it, he is from a city called Waterdeep. That's where he was born, and that's where he was raised. He's from a city called Waterdeep. And he, when he was a young man, signed up for an order of kind of paladins, like a holy order called the Order of the Gauntlet. And he served as a scout in their army, in their military. So his whole job was to ride out on horseback or to creep up behind enemy lines, figure out what they were doing, scout out their positions and report back. And he was part of this big battalion, this big army. And he had a commander who he was very close with. A commander who was going to be a player character, but unfortunately didn't make it into that game. And I was also working with one Michael on a character that did make it into that game. So this backstory is actually a cooperative backstory that ties in 3 different characters.
Yeah.
So we all work together to create
characters.
Yes.
But yeah.
So this backstory was a ride. So there was a plot to betray the Order of the Gauntlet, and the commander of Gregor's particular battalion, his friend, his commander, he was leading his forces to attack the battalion that was going to betray. And the battalion that was going to betray had a few informants on the inside, one of which was Michael's character. And Michael's character was one of the reasons that this battle took place at all. So one day, Gregor rides off to go scouting. His commander tells him, he's his friend. He says, hey, go scout, come back in a few hours. Right? I don't want to see you back here for a few hours. Gregor says, you got it, sir. He heads off. Well, when he comes back, he arrives right at the tail end of this battle. He looks around and he sees all of his friends, all the people he's come to know and come to love. They've all been killed in this giant battle, and he doesn't know what to say. All he knows is that everyone is wearing the same uniforms. Everyone is from his order. And he's looking around trying to figure out what happens. He spots his commander. His commander just looks proud. He looks like he's accomplished something. And that sent just this rage through Gregor. And he had this moment where he wanted to kill him, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. Then come in more of this Order of the Gauntlet. He says, oh, thank God. They will surely arrest my commander. They will surely take care of this man. And his commander, that he gets away. So they come after Gregor, and they start to chase him down as if he was a traitor as well. So Gregor goes on the run. And Gregor at this point he stumbled on the battlefield. He witnessed his friends die right in front of him. He held one of them as they were dying in his arms, and he took with him a piece of this banner that was all covered in blood, and he keeps it with him to this day. That is still something that he keeps with him. Another thing he took away from this battle, which is a reason why he can't just go back and hide away, and he can't just go to another land and live out the rest of his days, he took with him a wife that he met while he was a soldier. And this wife of his was actually a succubus who frequented his battalion in particular and basically tried to corrupt a lot of the soldiers, which was pretty easy to do. They were soldiers. But that's where she got a lot of her sustenance, and that's where she spent a lot of her time. And Gregor managed to make this succubus fall in love with him, which is extremely rare. It's super hard to do.
So while he's on the run, every day living like he is a criminal being chased, his wife is with him. And they have a child while on the run. But he knows that this child can't just be with him. He's on the run. He's a criminal. Not to mention, his child is half succubus. They're by all rights a demon child. They would never be accepted by anyone. So he tells his wife, go, take him with you, go back home. I will find my own way to you. But before they go, they make a pact. They make a deal. And this is where Gregor's in-game stats start to come in. He is a warlock. And his pact patron was his wife.
Yeah.
And he wanted to see his wife again one day, so he vowed to get more and more powerful until one day he could survive in her home and he could make it there safely. And so he goes off with this newfound power, and that is where his adventure starts. Still being pursued, still on the run, still not knowing exactly what happened, and still dealing with this trauma that he's been through. Every day, he would go through this ritual of trying to wash his hands clean of the blood that's on to him, he always almost hallucinated that there was blood all over his hands, and he never believed anyone if they said they could see it, or he would react very badly to certain things that reminded him too much or that triggered him to have a flashback or to dissociate or anything like that. So, but this is how he begins his adventure. Not in a good mental place. Not good mentally.
Yeah.
He started off pretty bad, and it just got worse, to be honest. For a while, he did well. His party, they started to earn his trust, and they started to, become friends. Michael's character, Marcus, I believe his name was,
yes.
Was in that party, and he never revealed what he was, who he was, what he had done. Although I think Marcus suspected who Gregor was the whole time.
Just a little bit.
Yeah, so which explains why he never mentioned it. Well,
just a tad.
Jacob, the devious DM, wasn't going to allow my character to simply work through his trauma, gain power, and go be with his wife and child. No. So one fateful day, Michael's character gets a note. It says, "Hey, come watch this in for me. It's signed from an old friend." And it calls him by a certain name. That name was, I think, Iron Fist?
Yes.
Iron Fist, which Gregor recognized but couldn't quite place where he heard that name from before. That was his old code name that he used back when he was part of the Order of the Gauntlet.
And still kind of uses.
Yes, so they go there, and there's all these Zentarim mercenaries, all these mercenary warriors all around this inn. And they all call him Iron Fist.
A shady rogue kind of a...
Yeah.
Like a organization.
Yeah, so they know Marcus, which automatically makes Gregor suspicious of.
Yeah.
And he's trying to place, where did he know this name from? And they go a whole week staying in this inn, watching it for this guy. They go through this whole investigation of, someone stole the money. And by the end of the week, Gregor finally remembers. The Iron Fist used to be part of the Order of the Gauntlet. And he says, I had no idea you were part of the Order of the Gauntlet. Why didn't you say anything? Right? And Marcus just kind of shakes his head. He's like, no, I'll tell you another time. Well, he picked an interesting time to do so.
He picked a very interesting time.
Later on, I believe that same session where we found, or maybe it was the next session.
This is the next session, I think.
Very next session, Gregor, who normally when he falls asleep dreams about his wife, and he kind of talks to his wife in his sleep, and he kind of visits his wife.
I think beforehand you lose someone. Is it? Yeah. So there was a combat encounter in which a certain animal, a certain steed that was very close to Gregor, had passed.
Yes. Yes, this is true. We got attacked, and Gregor's horse, who he loved his horse. He used to have a horse in the army, and it was one of the only things he left with was his horse. And he left his real horse, like his horse,
with a friend. But he had bought a new horse, and he bought the cart to go with it, and he was essentially the only one allowed to take care of this horse. He loved his horse.
Yep.
If I knew where his journal was, I would find the name of that horse. But
Charlotte.
It was Charlotte. Yeah, his horse's name was Charlotte. And they were attacked by these,
like a really big
psychos riding these giant alligators. and they really messed up. They really messed up Gregor after that. He lost his horse, and he kind of lost it a little bit. He went off and he started firing Eldritch blasts left and right, just obliterating this thing even after it was already dead. And his party members were getting really concerned. And one of them came up and started trying to stop him, physically restrain him. And this very odd thing happened with Gregor. They burned themselves. They burned their hands. Gregor was just pumping out heat like fire, which has never happened before. So Gregor goes off and he says, you know what? I need to figure out what just happened. And he goes and he starts to meditate. He focuses on his dreams, which normally when he does that, he goes and visits his wife.
Yeah, it's like his safe place.
Yeah, it's like his safe place. Well, this time...
Enter the devious DM again.
Enter the devious DM. Gregor has been getting very strong. He's been leveling up pretty quick. And at this point, Gregor is stronger than his wife.
Yeah.
Which means that she can't provide him with all the magic he needs. So,
therefore, it goes up the chain of command.
It goes up the chain of command. Someone else took over Gregor's contract as a warlock without his consent.
Mm-hmm.
They just forced their way in there. So Gregor, all of a sudden, is working under new management. Someone that he's never met, someone he's never made a deal with, but suddenly he needs. Because
and he still doesn't know who this is either.
He still to this day does not.
Yeah.
Because quarantine happened and we had to stop playing that game for a bit.
Yeah.
We will continue one day.
Hopefully.
And then more stories will come to you guys.
I miss it.
Gregor will return. Marcus, oh boy.
Gregor wants to kill Marcus. That's for another reason.
Gregor wants to kill Marcus.
Marcus will return for a limited time.
We're all praying for Marcus.
All but one of us.
Yeah.
So Gregor now is basically under new management. His contract has been shifted to someone he has no idea. And this person is much more evil and devious than his wife ever could have been.
Yeah.
And they
not quite as caring.
They want Gregor to do all the evil things, all the things that he never really wanted to do before. He wants him to embrace his trauma, and he wants him to get his power and to get vengeance, which is something that Gregor mentally can't really handle at all. Losing his one safe thing, the one thing he had left in this world. Oh, he cannot handle this at all. So he goes and he has a bit of a mental breakdown.
Mm-hmm.
He gets in a sword fight with another member of the party, and he just is taking out his anger before he gets knocked unconscious. And when he finally gets knocked unconscious, he calms down because he's knocked out.
Enter Marcus.
Enter Marcus. Gregor, after he awakens and he's calmed down and he's just trying to figure out, he's just trying to work through this, what just happened. Marcus comes in. He says, "Hey, Gregor, something I've been meaning to tell you." And I think it was a collective groan around the rest of the party, like, "Oh no, not now!"
From everyone but me, who was just smiling.
Everybody was
like,
asleep.
Yes.
Me and you were on watch.
Well, I mean, from the players themselves.
The three other players at the table were all going, "Oh no!" And I was just sitting behind the screen, going, "Ooh, this will be good."
So yes, you sit down, you start talking to Gregor, and you hand him the slip that happens to be the orders that were given to you to command your army that you were supplying intelligence to attack the one that I was in. And Gregor loses it, and he immediately tries to kill Marcus. He fails. He doesn't think he can beat you, so he turns to mist and he escapes into the woods. And The whole party wakes up after this and like, what's going on? What's going on? And here comes Applewalk.
the big bulky man of the party.
Yes, the most
tank.
caring member in terms of Gregor's mental health. Oddly enough,
Yeah.
He comes out there and he says, "Hey, it'll be okay. Come back when you can." And he gives him, I think, a blanket. I think he gave him a blanket so that Gregor could spend the night in the woods. And when he came back after having a very interesting dream and talk with his new patron, he came back with a big smile on his face. And he greeted Marcus as a friend. And that freaked out Marcus more than anything else that had happened in the past couple days.
Yes,
As
it
it really
did.
should.
Yes. And that is where Gregor's story ends for now. But that is how his backstory was created. And that is where his story is at so far. I worked with multiple people to create this thing. I took inspiration from a couple different sources. I wanted him to be this perfect case study for me to better understand PTSD, because I do know several people with PTSD, and I wanted to get into their head a little bit if I could and better understand what they're going through. And I think Gregor is a great example of one way that is possible.
Yeah, and before you guys try and jump into any comments saying that I'm an idiot for revealing my secret to Gregor like that, all right, understand this game was starting to slow a lot, and we were starting to move at a very slow pace, and me as a player was like, how do I spice this up and make it really interesting? I know. I'm going to tell Gregor I'm the reason that all of his platoon died.
What a great decision.
Yeah.
Did it come at the perfect time? In my eyes,
No.
it did. But this is all stuff that you guys can use to create a character of your own with their own fully fleshed out backstory. Or maybe you want to create a partial backstory and let other people help fill it in. That's totally fine too. That's something that we've all done. But as we're wrapping up today, we want to open up you guys to either in our DMs on social media or in our email, send us the most creative backstory or your favorite backstory that you've created for a character. I think that'd be really interesting to be able to see what you guys have done.
Yeah, we're all interested to see what you guys have got.
Yeah, it's always fun to hear from other players or even people that are interested, all the things that they come up with. Because there's untapped millions of people out there with creativity enough to play D&D and just not enough interest, or maybe they haven't heard about it, and we would love to hear from you guys.
Yeah, and speaking of social media and email, why don't you guys go ahead and let them know where they can find us at?
Certainly. So you can contact us on Instagram at travelerstipsandtales, all lowercase, no spaces. Twitter at tipstales. Our email is travelerstipsandtales@gmail.com. And you can also find us, if you're interested, on Patreon at Travelers Tips and Tales on there as well. We do offer some special rewards for anyone that wants to help us fund our beautiful hobby that we love to do to bring it to you guys. Because as of right now, all this stuff comes out of our pocket. And in the future, we would love to be able to afford all of this without, putting
to help
ourselves
it grow more
out and help it grow. Yeah.
We don't want to be broke anymore.
Hey, it's for the hobby. It's for our love.
That's true.
That's it. Yeah.
It still sucks.
I want some new dice. I haven't bought dice in a long time.
I think we need some new software first.
Also, Ben, I believe there's places that these people can go to get some of the resources they need for the game. Where would that be?
You're absolutely right, Michael. If you are anywhere near us and you happen to be able to look them up and check them out, you can always go to Forgotten Path Games. And they're our friends, and we love them, even though they might not like us all the time.
We're kind of loud and obnoxious, but
we're a little loud and obnoxious. But they wanted me to let you guys know that any special orders are 20% off. So if there's anything that you really want that they don't have in store, they can order it for you, and it's 20% off.
Sounds like a deal.
That's a great deal, actually. We all know this stuff can get expensive.
Yeah, especially new books when they come out.
Yeah. Plus, if they have it in stock, you don't have to wait for it. You can just buy it for the full price, and then they'll give it to you, and then you get to take it home, and you'll be supporting a local business that we really love.
How great!
That's where like half of my paycheck goes. And this is the other half.
If you're not in an area that is undisclosed that has this store, Forgotten Path Games, then look around on Google, look up game stores near you, and you would be surprised at just how easy it is to find one, whether it be immediately where you live or maybe it's one town over, but I'm sure it's not going to be that far of a drive. And it is such a huge help to those guys to keep them open by giving them your business and support. So we hope you guys enjoyed this session here, and we hope that you guys keep listening, and we hope that you would just join us on this adventure known as D&D.
And with that, I think that's all we have for today, right, fellas?
Indeed.
I've been Jacob.
I'm Ben.
And I'm Mike.
And until next time, this has been Travelers, Tips, and Tales.